Tighten up, leaders. Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the show that drills into the foundations of what leadership is all about. I'm your producer and co-host, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the country to mine for nuggets of wisdom. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the meeting room. Today, we are going to be talking about leadership because this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I am joined by Billy Duran, our host. Billy, how does it feel to have someone else do the introduction?
This is going to be a great experiment. How I can be quiet. I'm going to sit over here and observe you. I'm going to be grading the whole time. So,
well, that's on theme for today.
I'm happy to be here. I'm very excited about our guest today.
So today we have a special episode of the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. We have Allison Miller with us, who is an educator, interview coach, speaker, and curriculum writer. She has been recognized as a high school teacher of the year for the Mobile County Public School System, where she has taught English, history, and leadership. Allison is currently serving as a teacher at Mary G. Montgomery High School, where she directs the leadership initiatives there. So that brings us to the reason for our little twist this morning, Billy. Miss Miller was my high school leadership teacher, so this is a full circle moment for me.
Well, I'm just telling you, I want her to tell the whole story.
Not all of the stories.
There is no holding back. The microphone is hot, and we're going to hear all about it. So, but I think it would be, first, Allison, welcome to the podcast. I think it's going to be a cool experiment today because she's going to get to see the product that she's helped build and help you develop that leadership role in your life. But also, we're going to get to hear from the maestra herself about leadership and leadership development. Very excited for you to be here, Allison. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank y'all for having me here today. It's a full circle moment for me, too, to get to sit down with one of my former leadership students. One of my favorite things in the world is to run into former students and hear what's going on in their lives. So I am honored to be here. Haley, I'm super proud of you and can't wait to talk today.
Well, thank you. So, Allison, will you tell us a little bit about your leadership journey and why educating young leaders is so important to you?
I think for my leadership journey, I have to go all the way back to when I was a kid. I saw my parents leading a lot when I was growing up. They owned a nursery, so I saw them run a business. They volunteered, whether it was being the president of the PTA or my brother's soccer booster club. And I think that some of that just became ingrained in me. And I found myself doing the same, even in elementary school, whether it was safety patrol or student government. When I got to high school, I was always a class officer and involved in a lot of extracurricular activities. And so I think that even as a child, I was leading. And I guess that's why I think educating students about leadership is important. You know, to use John Maxwell's line, and Haley knows I use a lot of John Maxwell lines, yes. But everything rises and falls on leadership. And so I think if that's true, and I do believe that, then it's really important that we educate young people about leadership, that we tell them what leadership is about so that they can have the greatest impact in their own lives and on the lives of people around them.
So how hard is it to connect the dots, though? So you see the need for it. Do they see the need? And is it only until they see the need that you really begin to see the impact?
I think you can lead without understanding all of the nuts and bolts of it. But I think for full impact, you need to understand it. I think when I was growing up, we never used the word leader. We didn't talk about leadership. I think I was leading, but I don't know that I had the greatest impact because we didn't talk about it. So I think talking about it, educating students about what it is and that they are a leader is incredibly important, because to have that maximum impact, you need to learn and grow from that.
Yeah, I think that's that nature versus nurture leadership debate that we have. Like, are you born a leader or can you learn how to be a leader? I mean, this is a leadership podcast, so we always are saying that you can learn how to be a better leader. But like Allison said earlier, like she kind of always grew up with those leadership principles, even though she didn't realize that she was an actual leader. So how do you kind of bridge the intersection between leadership and education? And why do you believe that it's critical for young people to develop leadership skills early on?
You know, I think one reason why it's critical is that we see in a lot of organizations, companies, even countries, that we're experiencing a lot of leadership deficit. And that leadership deficit doesn't necessarily mean that we can't find leaders. Sometimes that's the case. But I think it means sometimes you have leaders, but they're not necessarily good ones. I've seen organizations impacted by toxic leadership or by leaders who are kind of in over their head, or even leaders who are what we would call effective leaders, but are kind of hanging on by a thread because of stress or burnout. And so I think the bottom line is we need healthy leaders in every sphere of influence. In secondary education, we talk a lot about college and career readiness, and I think that leadership education needs to be part of that to make sure that our students are able to go into any career path and actually lead. I pride myself on hopefully making my class a class that's going to help students regardless of where they end up. Whether they're a nurse or a welder or stay-at-home mom or dad or a podcast host, and really hope that it's going to apply to wherever they end up.
So we can see that leadership opportunities pop themselves. And they do. They present themselves, but without some possible training or some urging or some nudging to lean forward and say, let me, Haley has said this often on our podcast, put me in, coach. Mm-hmm. But giving the opportunity, but having a little bit of the resources to be able to step in. I like what you said about there are leaders that are just bad. And I think it's okay for us to recognize that, because if the organization or the education system rises and falls on leadership, whatever it is, and a bad leader can drain or tank an organization. So it's
Absolutely.
Good to point out that some leaders are just bad.
And we've talked to some of our guests, and some mentors are bad. So you can learn from your good mentors, and you can also learn from your bad mentors, those leaders that you say, I'm not going to be like that. Like, I'm not going to be a leader that is that kind of person. So that kind of brings us to some of the things that we learned in our leadership class. I know I put this on our notes, the Maury project that we did, and had to explain that to Billy. So for those of you who haven't had the privilege to have Miss Miller as your teacher, the Maury project is essentially a project to introduce the idea of mentorship and challenge the people in the class to go find your mentor and interview your mentor. So can you kind of elaborate on that particular project and the significance of leadership and leadership models in young people?
Yes. So the Maury project starts in the class with, we actually watched the movie Tuesdays with Maury. It's based on the book, the memoir, Tuesdays with Maury. And if you don't know the story, I encourage you to go out and grab the book, watch the movie. But it's a true story of a guy who's just kind of running at a fast pace, who reconnects with his old professor. And Maury, the professor, becomes really a mentor to Mitch and does all the things a good mentor does, stretches him, pushes him outside of his comfort zone, encourages him, but also asks the hard questions. And so we talk about what mentors look like and how they can benefit you, and really how it's a two-way street as well. That in that scenario, Maury didn't just help Mitch, but Mitch helped Maury. And so I think mentoring is so important. I think it's vital. I know how it's helped me. I don't think I would have survived my first year of teaching without my mentor. And even today, she continues to mentor me. Literally yesterday, I went into her classroom after work, because we now teach next door to each other. And I said, I had this situation today with a student. Here's how I handled it. Do you think I did the right thing? And so having those people in our lives, I think, is incredibly important, for young people, to find those people who have a little bit more experience. Sometimes when I start talking to kids about mentoring, they mention their best friend. And it's good if they have that, but you need someone who's a little bit further down the road, who has experience. And I don't think mentoring is, necessarily a make it or break it situation. You may already be on the right path, but mentors can help us maybe go down that path a little bit easier, a little bit faster, and to know that we're not, walking along.
And what I've found in being a mentor is not always about guidance, but sometimes it's just about affirmation.
Yes.
So it is affirming that we did the right thing, not necessarily about bringing new things all the time, but affirming, as you just did. Hey, here was a situation. This is what I did. Give me some feedback. And when that feedback comes and it's affirming, that's how we can be encouraged. I'm a seasoned veteran now. I'm starting to get to the end of my runway in our organization. I want to help affirm people I want to catch them doing it right, affirming that this is right. So mentors come in all different sort of shapes and sizes, but that affirmation part of being a mentor is incredibly important.
Absolutely. And for the Maury Project, I have students find a Maury, find a person, maybe they've never called a mentor, but would like to have as a mentor, or maybe someone who has been a mentor. And I put some stipulations on it. It can't be an immediate family member. It can't be someone they live with. And I do that because I think it's important to have mentors outside of your family. It's great if you have a supportive family, but a lot of times when life happens, sometimes things that are going wrong in the family, and you need an outside voice and someone that you can go to. And so for most students, it does push them outside of their comfort zone to go and actually ask someone to talk to them. And they have to do an interview and ask some questions, and they can't be questions like, what's your favorite flavor of ice cream, but some significant life questions. And hopefully that opens the door for them to see the benefits of mentoring, and even opens the door maybe to have further conversations with that person.
Yeah, I've told Haley this often. Many of my mentors early on in my career were, I found the world of audiobooks, and now it's podcast and all the different things that we have access to. But for the first time when I started, I was around 30 years old, and I was traveling and, doing a lot of, regional driving. So I had a lot of drive time, and my mentors were the people I were plugging into the cassette tapes at the time. That'll date me. But it was the first time I'd heard someone say, hey, you can have anything you want. You just got to put your goals and your plans together. And that was mentoring for me. And it's very simple, but it was a pivot in my life. No question about it. So as a matter of fact, I have a letter on my wall from Zig Ziglar, handwritten, a letter to me, because he was the person I was listening to. Zig was one of my favorite. Matter of fact, I listened to Zig Ziglar this morning when I was driving in. I love him because it was not only was it a source of encouragement to me, but he said something this morning, and I thought it was interesting to talk about today, is that when we listen to something that is encouraging and positive, it's actually the endorphins begin releasing in our body, which triggers all of our imagination and all of the things that we have learned. It almost starts unlocking doors. So when we get to be around someone who has a positive influence in our life, or whether it's an audio cassette or a podcast, there's something happens to us physiologically that begins to move ideas and creation and imagination. So tell me a little bit about how you encourage through your leadership classes, not only to listen to what you're saying, but also listen to these outside voices like a John Maxwell, or in my day, it was Zig Ziglar. How do you encourage that from your students?
I do that in part by incorporating those other voices in my classroom, meaning I don't want my students to only hear about leadership from me. And so that is incorporating, whether it's a book or a video or a podcast, if it's bringing someone into my classroom to speak or go to a leadership conference. I think exposing them to other voices and other leaders. So you play
a Simon Sinek clip or something like that?
Big Simon Sinek clip. Yeah, big fan. So I think, one, it just reinforces that hey, this isn't just Miss Miller up here talking. Like, this is real.
Yeah, it's affirming.
Yes, it is that affirming.
Not only is it affirming them, but it's affirming you and validating you as a leadership coach, because this person comes in and says, I'm saying the same thing she's saying. I mean, so well done. I love that idea.
Well, and hopefully they get that mindset, right? And so they're looking for leadership. They see leadership, even in, we mentioned Tuesdays with Maury, if it's watching Tuesdays with Maury, or even another movie that we may watch in class to analyze from a leadership perspective. I've had students say like, well, now anytime I watch a movie, I'm looking for the leadership in the movie. And so it's just that exposure that hopefully just gets them thinking and evaluating everything through the lens of leadership.
So if you were in a large group auditorium setting and you had one topic to talk on, 45-minute, I'm fixing to take a swing for the fence, what would it be?
It's a tough one. Normally I have my kids for like 3 years, but if I had 1 hour, one thing that I've been coming back to again and again with my students and even with other groups of students that I've been asked to speak to is a topic that on its face is not super leadership-y. I don't know if that's a word, leadership-y, but I use it.
We just coined it, leadership.
Leadership-y, but it's friendship. And that sounds almost elementary, I think, to say, hey, we're going to talk about friendship today. But what I have seen and what studies and the news shows us is that loneliness has really spiked among all ages, particularly young adults. We see that the number of people saying they have no friends at all has increased. And those who have friends say they don't see them very often. And that's a problem, right? And even the Surgeon General for the United States has said that social disconnectedness is detrimental to your health. It's as detrimental as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so I just think it's a problem that we're seeing in young people, but like I said, of all ages. And I think that you even can see that in leadership. A lot of times it's easy for a leader to, especially as they kind of go up the ladder of leadership, to become more isolated and to kind of feel lonely, maybe lonely. They may be the only person at their company or organization in that specific position. And I think it can be lonely. And so for me, I've seen with my students that it's important to talk about friendship. I think we assume that everyone, you just learn how to be friends. But, we have books on dating and marriage and parenting and leading. You don't see many books on like friendship and how to deal with conflict and how to make friends, how to find friends. And so I think that the people that you surround yourself with, that inner circle, more than anything else, determines the quality and the direction of your life. And so I think it's important to talk about friendship and to talk about, the ins and outs of that. I know for me as a teacher, as a leader, really just as a human, what has helped me most, first would be my faith, but second would be my close friends, my people. And I think that all of us and even leaders need to make sure that we have those relationships in our life.
And I think you're hitting on a good point with friendship because, being a friend is how you gain friends. You become a friend to enlarge your circle of friendship. But I think you're hitting on something very important, not just for leaders, that we are so impacted and influenced by the people we are closest to. And, Henry Cloud wrote this incredible book called Necessary Endings. And in that book, he talked about actually having to end some relationships with friends because it was impacting his life in such a negative way. It was a necessary ending for him to go forward. We can see that in our organizations. There are times when people just aren't a good fit for the organization, and leadership sometimes have to step in and define that and say, look, we think you're a great person. This is just not the fit for you. So we're going to either try to find you another spot here that better suits you, or we're going to help you find your way into another position, probably at another organization, because this is just not working here. So leadership it is important that we're able to define that. But I love how you've talked about friendship, because the people around us, the people that are closest to us, the people we spend the most time with. I had a pastor tell me one time, you give me your checkbook and I can show you where your priorities are. Give me your phone and your top 10 calls and I'll tell you what kind of person you are. So we are so influenced and impacted by our friends. So Great segment there. Haley?
Yeah, you stole my comment that I was going to make. My grandfather always used to tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. And so that is your friends and the people you surround yourself with are a huge indicator of who you want to be in life. So, all right, everybody, when we come back, we will discuss how leadership education impacts our leadership communities. So we'll be right back. Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com. All right, everyone, we are back, and we're talking with Allison Miller about leadership. So we're just going to get right into it. Allison, do you see the difference in how students today are engaging with leadership versus, I don't want to date myself, but about 10 years ago when I was one of your students?
Well, let me first, instead of being specific to leadership, just talk about students in general, because I think that it's really across the board. What I'm seeing in my leadership class is across the board, not only at my school, but really nationwide, in some ways worldwide. You know, first of all, probably the biggest difference between now and 10 years ago is that these students have been through a pandemic, and we have a lot of learning loss. And, you know, that we are still trying to catch up from that loss that we had during the pandemic. In many ways, things seem back to normal, but it's not. And that really shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, if you talk to educators in New Orleans, some will tell you they still haven't caught up since Hurricane Katrina. And that was, 17, 18 years ago. So I think that's one factor. The technology, even in just 10 years, of course, has moved very quickly. Social media is different. And, you know, I think that can be a blessing and a curse. And, you know, we've also seen in our schools a struggle with mental health. You know, we see students, you know, I see from 10 years ago students who deal with more anxiety. They're more stressed out. We've seen an increase in self-injury, suicide. And, you know, I think there's a connection between a lot of those. You know, if you look at pandemic and social media and mental health, even going back to what we talked about earlier, isolation, lack of friends, I think that is all connected and has, you know, made it quite frankly difficult. I don't know, certainly in my career, there's ever been a more difficult time to be a student or a teacher. And so I think those factors do affect learning, and I've seen that even in my own leadership classroom with my leadership students. My guess is if you talk to a lot of employers, I don't know, Billy, maybe you can speak to this, but that maybe they've seen some of the same things in employees over the past 10 years, the changes.
Well, for certain, even still unpacking the pandemic stuff. I mean, I do think that we're still unpacking the impacts of it and how they will affect not only society but our businesses without question. I do find it interesting, though, that you point out several bullet point items that we have seen. And so the correlation between the student and the employee, very similar, very, very similar. And not only that, the asks are different. The asks are about remote work, and they'd rather have time off than increases in pay. There are a lot of things that have changed, and I think the pandemic has certainly contributed to that. But I think that social media and the impacts of it, because, you know, back to Maxwell, he says leadership is influence and nothing less. Nothing more, nothing less is influence. If we don't believe that social media is not influencing not just our young people, it has a huge impact on leadership. I love this part that you're talking about leadership, because you're right in the place where these students need to be getting it, even when they don't recognize they get it. Because we talk about emerging leaders often as people inside of our organizations that can be leaders. They still don't recognize it. They need to be told, hey, yes, you can do this. So I really appreciate the fact that you urged the school to put this program in, because you are making a difference. You can see it right here in front of you. You're making a difference in the lives of people, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I like how we talked about the intersection between how students are facing these issues now. These issues don't go away, and they're for everyone. I mean, social media and we talk about the pandemic. It was overload of information and just so much going on, and no one really truly knew how they felt about anything or what to do about anything. I mean, everybody was kind of just trying to figure it out. But we, Billy and I, the thing that we talked about most is, okay, this is who we are and this is what we believe in. So we're always going to stay true to that in all of the different things. So we're going to build a culture around those things, and we're going to stick to what we believe in. And so there's a culture of leadership. There was a different culture when I was in high school. The culture that I had is going to be different than the culture of high school students today. But how can we kind of embrace that a little bit, but also challenge the culture to better support these leaders as a community? So as a leader in the community, I might not engage with students today like I should, because I don't really know what the culture is. So how can we do that?
First of all, I love that you mentioned the culture. I think the community and business owners play an important role in the process. At the school level, we are doing what we can, but community support is always important. And I think sometimes that's, a practical. I mean, we can always use resources, but even more than that, we need people. We need business leaders and community leaders to connect with the school, to actually get in front of students and to have that personal connection, whether that's speaking to a class, if it's providing mentors for students, if it is, coming to speak to a large group, maybe to speak at some of our conferences that we do for student leaders. Think that helps students see the practicality of what we're doing. Sometimes students sit in class and think, when am I ever going to use this? So I think seeing and hearing from leaders in the, quote, real world gives them a picture of what their future could look like and the importance of actually thinking about leadership. We do hear from employers a lot about the soft skills, right? That's what they're really looking for. You can kind of train people a lot of times in the hard skills, right? Teach them how to use the software to run the equipment, but it's hard to teach someone to be on time and to be respectful and to have a good work ethic. And so I think hearing from employers that those are the types of things that they actually need would be helpful to students and would be a good way to partner with the school.
And I think that one of those dot connections are, we often talk about leadership and we immediately think about senior leaders or executive leadership. The truth is there's a disconnect between leadership and advancement. We think about, I'm going to be a leader. Where's my desk? I'm going to be a leader. Where's my increase? I'm going to be a leader. Where's my advancement? All these things. And truthfully, leadership is about day-to-day development because of finding how to lead yourself. I mean, the biggest challenge in my life is that guy I look at in the mirror every morning. That's the biggest challenge because he wants what he wants. And what we're learning, though, is servant leadership is about serving others first. And that, the mission of our company is to create value in and for the people we serve. And when we grow up with a motive of what's in it for me, what's best for me, where's my desk, where's my advancement, we get a distorted view of what leadership is all about. Leadership is a privilege, and we should be motivated as leaders to connect the dots for young people in particular, showing them a pathway to success, because it isn't just tomorrow. It's step by step by step by step. It's an incredible story, and I don't know the whole parable, but the mule is down in the well, and we're just going to cover him up, and we're just throwing dirt down the well. He just shakes the dust off, and after a while, there's enough dirt in the well for the mule to climb out. That's the way that it's just a one shovel at a time. We are looking for leaders to be willing to say, what does it take for me? But it's also our responsibility to say, answer that question, because there are a lot of people that really want to step into the role, but we're not answering the question well enough. Here's your pathway to success. Here's what you can do. So I'm glad that we are talking about how we connect the dots, because I think we're finding out today, even in this conversation, I think there's a little bit of disconnect at times between what genuine leadership is, step by step, little at a time, compared to jumping up into the CEO spot. We don't go from sweeping to the floor to the CEO overnight. It just doesn't happen. It's not practical to think that way.
Right. And I think, we kind of live in an age of instant gratification, right? If we want something, we get it now. We want something, we order it off of Amazon. It's going to show up next day on our front porch. And so I do think that it's important to recognize that it is a process. Leadership is a process. It takes time. And, we're not going to get those big fancy titles, which isn't leadership anyway, just having a title. But I think in a lot of people's minds that's it. And there's this idea that they can jump from point A to point Z overnight. So I love what you said about even looking at people who aren't at the top, right, of the leadership ladder and letting students kind of see the progression and seeing the steps that need to happen.
So, Allison, what does a feedback session look like in your class? So, Haley talked about doing the mock interviews, and that's somebody outside coming in and giving feedback. How do you give the students feedback on how they're progressing in the soft skill? That's all you're able to evaluate. You're not teaching them science, math, and things like that. So how are you evaluating them along the way?
One way is by putting them in practical, real world situations. We can sit and talk about leadership, and they can see if they can spout off something, a principle. And I think that part's important. I think it's important for me to stand in front of the classroom and talk and teach and disseminate the information about what good leadership looks like. But to really evaluate if they're getting the concept, it really is about, application. And so it's about taking that theory that we've learned and putting into action. And the main way that I do that at the high school level is through event planning and community service. We do a wide variety, Haley can tell you, of different events. We plan school-wide events like Red Ribbon Week. We host leadership conferences. We run blood drives. We collect toys for toy drives. We go and volunteer at elementary school fall festivals. And what that means is we are taking principles like teamwork, strategic planning, communication, servant leadership, and we're actually doing it. We're actually putting it. And so for me, we're actually putting that into practice. And so for me, that is one way that I evaluate, because I can see them. It's not just, do you know this is the thing? Do you know that we should serve as leaders? But when I can see that they're serving, they show up to an event and I see them putting others first. I can evaluate that.
Do you get all the way down to the nitty gritty of, hey, Bob, I saw you over here and I saw you reaching out to this person. I saw this looked like it was about to come undone and you stepped. I mean, is there real time feedback on your observations?
Yes. I mean, we were at a fall festival just a few weeks ago, one of our elementary school fall festivals, and they were all at different stations and interacting with kids in different ways. And so I was able to go around one by one and give feedback. And a lot of it was just positive feedback. Like, I saw you doing this and you're doing a great job. But to let them actually, and for a lot of them, sometimes that means getting outside of their comfort zone. But to hear that feedback, to get that affirmation. I was told by some of the other adults at that function how well they were doing. So I made sure I relayed that feedback to them so they knew it wasn't just me, it was other people as well. And so sometimes it's that type of feedback, real time. Sometimes it's more of a reflection. We recently hosted a leadership conference for student leaders from all of our athletic teams, extracurricular organizations. We also in the midst of something called Holiday Spirit Week. And so a few days ago, we sat down and we walked through a reflection and an evaluation. They actually first evaluated themselves. And there was discussion in the class. They pointed out other things that people did well. And then we went through, hey, what were the pros and cons? What did we do well in these events? As a group, what do we need to work on? What could we change for the future? What are some ideas? And so I think just being intentional with that reflection helps me but hopefully helps them learn that process of evaluating themselves.
I love that part. Oh, I raised my hands up in there. Nobody can see this. I love that part because I'm not sure if you recognize the illustration you're giving to your students, because you are actually demonstrating leadership qualities by affirming them and telling them what to do. I think it would be a cool exercise for you. I'm going to give you the homework assignment now. For you to get feedback from them on your own leadership style and how what are the things that they like about you. So here's something this exercise I did with our group, and this was a long time ago. We had our senior leader group and said, what do you want to see in a leader? Or what do you think the most important things are about leadership? And everybody that called out a word, I just wrote it on the board, but I recognized who was calling out what, because that's what they want to see in a leader. That's what this person wants to see in a leader. So not everybody wants to be led the same.
Right.
Some wants a lot of feedback. Some wants some affirming. Some wants even my children. I got all of my children, they're motivated differently. And as leaders, we have to recognize that. But I think what you've told us here today, and I think this is so important for leaders to hear, catch your people doing it right, affirm what they're doing right, but to come back afterwards and say, last week I saw you doing such and such, and I appreciate the way you handled that, because they know you're watching them.
Right.
And that is so important for young leaders to go, man, my teacher's watching me, my supervisor's watching me. The person that I report to, this is not just all talk. It's real and it's genuine. And I think the feedback you give them affirms that genuineness, and I think that's what makes you such a great leader, is that you affirm it and catch it while they're doing it.
And I think the one of the big points you mentioned there is the leader does have to be watching, right? They can't just be in their office. They've got to be where their people are, so that they can see what is happening, so they can. And I think as you do that, as you give feedback and give affirmations, that builds that trust, so that students or employees feel like they can come to you and they can give you honest feedback. We in that feedback session we did a few days ago, some of them mentioned some things that maybe weren't as good, and I knew and even admitted, hey, well, that was on me as a leader. And so, but I think they felt confident enough to be able to share that, and hopefully that also allows them, when they are self-reflecting and realize maybe they need some help or there's an area they need to be strengthened in, that they feel like they can come to you as the leader and voice that.
So do you do that? Do you allow them to do some journaling or something, kind of an after-action event? I mean, we call those after-action reports. Once the event's over, everybody comes in, this is how we could do this better. But I think that what you're really talking about here, Allison, is culture. You're creating a culture, and you can't create culture from the grandstand. You got to be on the floor. You got to be on the field. You got to have your door open. That's the only way. Culture comes from the top. The tone is set from the top. The execution is from the top. And, we found that in our communications, culture can't be done from the outside in. I mean, leadership has got to push culture and protect culture. So, well done. That's very well done.
So for all of the nugget watchers out there, so we mine for nuggets of wisdom here on the podcast. So for all of those nugget watchers out there, I know a lot of them, we talked about education and how we can kind of invest in leadership education for students, but there's business owners out there, and they want to kind of know how they can build a curriculum for their employees. So how can you kind of, the idea of a curriculum for employees and leadership is probably going to be new for some people. So how would you suggest that people do that for their teams?
Well, I love curriculum. I don't know why, but I love putting together content that's going to help people, in my case, my students. When I first started teaching leadership, which is something I didn't plan on doing, but when I first started teaching leadership to students, there was not a ton of stuff out there, curriculum available for student leaders. And so I gravitated first to what I knew, which was a lot of John Maxwell and things like that, and started writing a lot of my own curriculum and coming up with my own activities or games or other things that we do in the classroom. But I've adapted that over the years as I've gotten to know my students. I've adapted that over the years as students have changed, like we talked about, and circumstances have changed. So I think you first have to know your team before you can figure out what type of curriculum you might need. You have to know your team and understand what their needs are and tailor it to them. And whether that is, we're going to come in once a week and talk about leadership, or it's a book study, or it's a conference, or it's mentoring, whatever that looks like, I think in order to get buy-in from your people, it has to be something that's going to actually help them. Not just something so we can check a box and say, hey, we did some leadership, but it has to be something that's actually going to help them where they are. And, I think once you determine what that is, you have to be consistent with it. And I think that goes back to what Billy mentioned earlier with culture. It has to be part of your culture, not just something we do once a month or once a year, but something that is ingrained in the culture that we see played out in the company.
Yeah, I love how we talked about, and this has kind of been a theme when you talked about the leadership group that you brought in. You create the program, you test the program, you commit to the program, and then you review the program. Yeah. So for all of those people watching, I mean, that's something that we've talked about on the podcast. I mean, you can't just commit to something and then not have a little bit of wiggle room there.
Right, because here's the deal, you may have the best plans, and sometimes they crash and burn, right? Sometimes I can tell you, as a teacher, I've tried stuff. I thought, man, this is just going to be the greatest thing. And it was not, right? It just did not go over well. So I think it is always adapting. And I think you've got to be willing to acknowledge that. And, I'm a planner. I like to have a plan and stick to a plan. But, you've got to acknowledge when things didn't work or you made the wrong choice and have to be willing to adapt.
Well, to wrap up, for every single guest that we have, we always like to ask them what they're reading. Either it's a leadership book or a podcast or whatever it may be. So, Allison, what are you reading?
Honestly, right now, my life is consumed by reading scholarly journal articles about global leadership. I took the plunge and went back to school in January, and so a lot of my reading is for classes right now. But one of the books that I think has impacted on a more practitioner side has impacted my leadership, friendships, really every aspect of my life is a book called The Road Back to You. It's by Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile. It's about the Enneagram. And some people have conflicting thoughts on the Enneagram, but I have found it to be a valuable tool. I love personality tests. Haley probably took a few in my class. I love Myers-Briggs, DISC. And this has been another tool for me. And this book, I've gone back to this book again and again. It's not necessarily a leadership book per se, but for me as a leader, it's helped me learn a lot about myself. I think one of the keys to good leadership is self-awareness. And so it's helped me become more self-aware about who I am. I happen to be an Enneagram 1, so I'm a recovering perfectionist. But it's helped me learn about and affirm, and help me learn about other people. And so whether, like I said, it's in a friendship, if it's in a workplace relationship with my students. I actually have my students take we talk about Enneagram and my Leadership 3. And it's funny, they'll some come back and say, I made my boyfriend take that test so I could learn more about him, And so they're seeing the value, because it really comes down to understanding yourself and understanding others, right? And having better relationships. So that for me has been one of the standout books that has helped me.
Well, I can't just sit here. I mean, I love that. I love the Road Back to You, the test. I love the Myers-Briggs. I love all the things that we've done over the years. And, I am self-diagnosed, attention deficit, but I have trouble being organized. But what's so great about that is, people have come around me that are organized, and I love that idea. I heard someone say the other day to help your recovering perfectionist, anything we're doing is worth doing poorly until you can figure out how to do it well. So there are times when being around perfectionists make me nuts. So
we can do that. I will admit that.
Yes, but the cool thing about that, what we found in some of our tests within our own group, is knowing each other and how each other think, act, how we're geared. That's what makes the beauty of a team, and that's how culture is built and protected. And also that's how it attracts others to the team, because you can come in and be who you are.
Right.
We don't need another me. We need people that can fill all the gaps that I don't have. So I love those personality tests. I love Myers-Briggs. I'm your typical extrovert. I'm an
introvert.
I can get 100 things started, finish none. That's me.
I am right down the middle.
Yeah.
I am just dead center.
I do sometimes identify as an extroverted introvert.
Mm-hmm. There you go.
But I do think, I think those tools can be very helpful. One thing I love about the Enneagram is that, a lot of these tests talk about what you do or how you behave, and it's more about why. It looks at the motivation, and, all three of us could do the exact same thing, but why we did it may be very different. And so I think that's helpful in the team context for sure.
So normally we end the show and we ask our guests to give us one piece of advice that young leaders can start today. You work with young leaders every day, so we're going to switch it up a little bit, and we're going to ask you, what is one thing that a leader can do today to help instill leadership in those around them?
I would say be present. Be present. I know we've already touched on this a little bit, but just being present with your people, paying attention, spending time with them, making sure that they do know they're valued. And I think a lot of times it's beneficial to maybe do that in a different way. Like I know for me, some of the times where I feel like I've most connected with students and got to know students were days we were not in my classroom. We were on the ropes course doing a zip line. We were at the food bank volunteering. There's just something about being in a different context that I think opens the door for you to get to know your people, for you to get to know the people around you, and it builds that relationship. Just a different environment. I'm not saying you have to go on vacation with people, right? But to just spend time with them in a context, I think it helps you get to know them. I think, at the end of the day, everybody wants to be known and valued, and that allows you, I think, to get to know people differently than maybe you do in a classroom or in an office when you can see them interact and get to know them outside of your regular environment. So I think it's just paying attention. It all comes back to relationships. Really, leadership all comes back to relationships.
Yeah, and a genuine leader is going to, those words are going to affirm for genuine leaders because that's what they practice. You can tell by the way you do things, the way you speak about your students, about the genuineness about serving them and helping them. And being present, I think, is spot on. Perfect way to end a great segment. So, Hali, you're the host of the show today. So, do you get to say goodbye? I mean, look, you did a great job today. So, I would congratulate you on your host today. And
proud
Allison,
teacher moment. Proud teacher moment
Allison,
for sure.
Well,
excellent job.
We talked about being present, and this felt almost like an out-of-body experience for me. So I can't say I was exactly 100% present, but it was definitely, today was a challenge. I was a little nervous coming in here today and switching
a little stretch goal.
A little stretch goal. We've talked about those before. This was just really a privilege for me to be able to do this. And we talk about value. This was a valuable investment into my leadership journey, I think. So I really, really appreciate you being here with us today.
It's a lot of fun.
So we've been here with Allison Miller, another fantastic episode of the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. For everyone listening, tighten up.
Tighten up.
Well, Billy, that was an interesting episode.
It's different,
to say the least.
Different being the host.
Yeah, it was definitely a stretch goal. We talk about stretch goals a lot.
Yeah.
That was definitely one of them. So, Billy, what was your takeaway?
So, first of all, let me just say this. Communication and the arts of communication, you identified it off the air when we were talking about it, that segue between question to question and keeping things flowing. From a teaching point, this is part of that communication that we can learn how we deal with our teams. We want communications to be conversational. We want them to flow. We want them to not be awkward. So, it's okay to be in that awkward spot every now and then, because then you feel like what they experience, from time to time. From the episode, what I really love about Allison is she is just she's a genuine leader. But the nugget I took away is she's demonstrating leadership when she goes back and gives feedback. That, to me, is one of the most incredible things that we can do as leaders, is to give good, positive, and timely feedback.
Mm-hmm. For me, it's kind of hard to think about my nugget just for the episode. My nugget just from my experience of having the leadership classes and learning from Miss Miller and this whole experience is there is almost a cliff that anybody will go off into the pool of leadership. And if you don't find yourself going in that direction, whether it's you get put in a leadership class, or you have somebody who tells you that you can do it, or you get put on a sports team, whatever it is, finding that cliff to go off of and jump off of and say, yep, I'm a leader and I'm going to go and do these things. And then finding those resources to help you do that. I mean, that is the key here, finding those resources to help you be a better leader.
I think one thing for you, and I think that you kind of got to experience this in person today, but as people like Allison Miller walk into our lives, back into our lives, she was a big influential part of your life. But when that person comes to your mind, I mean, we've got leaders listening to this program that have been impacted by other people. Pick up a pen, pick up your phone, give them a call, tell them thank you, send them a note, because that continues their leadership journey. Mm-hmm. That feedback getting from, you know what, Haley was listening when she was in my leadership class. I'm sure that meant a lot to her today. So well done on your host, what would you call that? Your very first host of the episode.
Primary host?
No, it was your debut as the host of the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership. So well done.
Well, thank you. For everyone, thank you for joining us, and tighten up.
Tighten up.
Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duray.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.